This video was made possible thanks to Spitfire Audio. So I was looking through my email one day and I got an email from Sarah at Spitfire Audio and she said, "Hey, would you be able to make an 80s style track in under an hour?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can." And she's like, "Here's the catch. You can only use the new Trevor horn library that Spitfire Audio just came out with." And I said, "That's a pretty strong request, but I think I can do it." And so after an hour of going through 80s synth patches, this is what I was able to come up with. And I want to show you guys how I made it. But first, just a quick disclaimer, I am not being paid by Spitfire Audio. While they did give me a license for this plugin, all thoughts and opinions are my own. So a quick backstory on who Trevor Horn is for anyone who's not familiar. He's essentially one of the, I would call, pillar, cornerstone producers of the early 80s. And he's honestly had his hands involved with a lot of cornerstones of music and culture. The first notable thing in Trevor's career was he was half of the original founding members of the Buggles, who are famous for their song Video Killed the Radio Star. The music video was literally the first music video on MTV ever. And that completely changed the way that people started consuming music. Side note, another member of that group includes a very young Hans Zimmer. But throughout the 80s, Trevor would produce multiple songs for large acts like Yes, ABC, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Pet Shop Boys, Dollar. I kind of created my own take on his sound. So the way I made this track was I literally would find a patch that I would like, then hit duplicate on the track and just start looking for another one. And I just did that for a few minutes and I was able to find a bunch of different patches that I really like. So the first patch here is this Aged Circuits preset, which sounds like this. I was literally just finding presets that I liked, and I just found this one, and I really liked how it sounded, and so I just kind of made this sort of minor sounding chord progression. I think one of the staples of Trevor's production and his songwriting is mainly in his chord choices. A lot of the tracks that I listened to that he did, there's a lot of emphasis on getting things to sound harmonically interesting with as few notes as possible. There's also a large emphasis on there being like a low root that is staying consistent for a long period of time while there's some higher voicing of the chord that's constantly changing. You can really listen to that in Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. After that, I wanted to really beef it up with some pads. Which is this Beyond the Stars preset. I guess it would be helpful for me to actually go through the plugin a little bit. So a lot of your major macros are going to be here. So you have this large effects knob where you can just kind of select a different parameter and adjust it this way. I think it's really cool the way that they have this set up. Essentially, you have this A side and this B side of the plugin. And the source that you're choosing is all of these different things that they've sampled from Trevor's studio, like his analog synth library or some of his live bass playing. And then you essentially have this blend between the two. So each of them have their own, they call it a wobble control, but it's a volume, pitch, and filter, their own envelope with a high pass and low pass, and just a bunch of macros here. And I think probably the coolest thing is here at the bottom, you can adjust the blend between the two. But you can tell that this was kind of created with like a songwriter / sound designer approach in mind, because one of the first things I discovered that made me really like this plugin is this oscillator mixer, which makes it so that every time you play something, it ignores this lower blend control and just starts going crazy. You can also adjust the envelope shape for that. So after I got that pad sound, I did this sort of higher pluck dude. I also should have clarified at the beginning, pretty much every single sound that I used in this track is just a preset that I pulled up and made the smallest of tweaks to. After those guys, we have the bass. I think another thing that was very apparent to me when I was listening through Trevor's catalog of tracks is that he is a bass player. Listen to them really closely and you can hear a live bass sort of layered underneath all of his synth bass stuff. which is like a really nice, like crunchy, clean, low-end DI. I think another thing that's cool about this plugin is the way that it handles effects. So you have Bay A effects and Bay B effects, which are effects that you essentially can put on the two individual sound sources independent of each other. So if I wanted to, I could go to this pluck bass here. But if I wanted to, I could put a flanger on just this cello sound over here. Also, all of these effects can go beyond 100%. And so a way to compensate for that is on the master here, you have a limiter that will just keep things at the volume that you need them. But yeah, there's just a bunch of really creative effects for both of these to make them really unique. But then here on the master, you have even more effects. Probably one of my favorites is this convolution reverb because it has really cool impulses. That tone that's coming through, that's actually not a note or an oscillator or something like that. That is the convolution reverb profile, just adding tones, because the convolution reverb here has just a bunch of really fun creative effects, like a 20-second decay hall. The inside of a harp. Anyway, yeah, there's just a bunch of stupid creative stuff that is, I find, really practical for sound design stuff and is really easy to make a preset patch be really unique. And on top of these two effects bays that are separate to each sound source and a master effects, you also have your aux effects, which are your standard delays, reverbs, choruses, and flangers. So I layered up this live bass with this synth bass, and then just did a little bit of multiband compression. And then you can see here, there was this middle one where I tried to do what I normally do. For anyone who's watched this channel, I normally like to add beef below a synth or add some grittiness above it by just duplicating the instrument and transposing it an octave below. And I was just doing that with this synth bass to see if it would work. But then I realized you can actually do that inside of the plugin. You have this clone feature here at the bottom where when you have this box checked, it will create a duplicate of that source and you can transpose it. So here's with it off. And then I can hit clone and it will transpose this an octave down, but still keep that original source in. I can also transpose it an octave up. Another thing that really surprised me was the drums, because when I was listening to Trevor's past work on Spotify, I was assuming I was going to have to go through Splice and find like the oldest like Lindrum sounding samples and go through all this work to try to find a kit that would like match this style. And again, I was pleasantly surprised. I just went in and realized that they have drums sampled from Trevor's library of drum machines. And so they have this really cool 80s vibe to them. Again, not really doing a whole lot of processing on this. The drum bus has a little bit of compression and I think a little bit of multiband, but it's barely doing anything. That was just more to contain the thwack when it's all placed together. But yeah, it was literally as simple as just pulling up this patch and then finding the kick and snare sample that I liked. And it was pretty straightforward from there. I'm going to be honest. It took like a few seconds. I think another thing that is sort of a staple of Trevor's production, but also this era of production, is drum machine style hats. So not the sort of like hyper realistic multi-sampled hats. It was very like Lindrum-y. So I found another Solar patch that had nice hi-hats, and I just made this pattern that to me reminded me of just like 80s drum machine. And then I think another addition to this vibe is the sort of like random percussion hits that get added in all the time, which I used this bass beats preset that are just like little pepper flakes that are in between the main hits. So when you play all of the drums together, like it has such a vibe. It's so fun. And another thing I should point out is I'm not using any of like my normal send effects or anything like that. All of these drums have like their own reverb module built into it. And I was planning on turning off all of those reverbs and just busting them out to an aux reverb. But the reverb that comes by default on most of these patches, it's kind of a vibe. And I kind of didn't want to turn it off. So I just kind of left it on. And yeah, I'm going to be honest, I didn't really do a whole lot beyond that. On the master, I just used a little bit of Soothe to tame some of the resonant frequencies, a little bit of RC20 on like 3%, just barely at all, just to sort of tame the high end, make it sound a little bit older. And then I just ran it into some Fab Filter to limit it and bring it up to the level. But yeah, this plugin was super fun to make a track with. Like, I'm not even joking, guys. I have like a timer set up here for when I make instrumentals, and it's normally set for like an hour just because I feel like that's the best way for me to creatively get all of my ideas out. And literally all of these parts and this arrangement were done in like 30 minutes. And I literally got to like a halfway point where I'm like, I think I'm done. Like the plugin is very flexible and it's very easy to get sounds to shift the way you want them to. And with stuff like the EQ on the master and a limiter to tame stuff, you can get pretty close to like a finished mixed sound just straight out of the plugin. And altogether, it sounds like this. And yeah, that's the finished track. Again, special thank you to all the people at Spitfire Audio, and specifically Sarah for sending this over and getting in contact with me. This library just went live today on Spitfire's website, so I would highly recommend checking it out. But yeah, we will be back to our regularly scheduled video next week. See you guys.